Today is Labinar number 1, and it's a virtual introduction into advancing mission thrivability. We want to tell you a little bit about what this initiative is and why it's important to you and your organizations. You may have asked, what is a Labinar? Well, a Labinar is a completely made up word. We do that at the Patterson Foundation frequently. And in the world of the pandemic, we decided to launch Advancing Mission Thrivability and do what we would normally do in an on-site learning lab to provide good content and also to do it in a way that would give everybody access. So today is really about providing opportunities to learn, to share some tools and training, but to do it using a webinar format. We also want to provide some opportunities for engagement and interaction, but we will be doing it in the wonderful world of Zoom, and we'll tell you more about that in just a moment. You're all familiar with Zoom rules, but just to recap, I'm going to let Abby Rowland share with you just a few of those ground rules for this morning. So Abby?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So our first ground rule is we would ask that you please rename yourself so we can see your name and the organization that you're representing. So to do that, you can click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen and then scroll over your name. A button that says more should pop up. And if you click on that more, there's a drop-down menu that says rename. So if you could please rename yourself so we know where you're coming from, that would be great. All participants are muted to be able to cut off background noise. We'd ask that you please post your questions and comments in the chat box. We'll respond to as many as we can during the webinar itself. And if we're not able to respond to your question during the meeting, we will follow up after. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the TPF website afterwards. So you can go back and review or listen to a section again if you like. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Abby. So why are we here today? Well, we're here for a few reasons. The first of which is to help each of you within your organizations think about a way that you can strengthen the decision-making that you go about doing every day. And we've shown that little barbell icon over to the left because we think about advancing mission thrivability as an opportunity to strengthen your organization's muscles, your organization's muscles in terms of mission, in terms of the decisions that you make. And in particular, we talk about it in terms of applying a mission-centric lens to continue to guide what you do within your organizations, but also considering what we call an economically informed approach. And we see the combination of those two, mission-centric and economically informed lenses, as giving you the opportunity to think about decision-making perhaps a little bit differently than you may have up until now or in the past. Also, we talk about advancing mission thrivability in terms of rigor and discipline to your own organization's decision-making process. So we do have an action-packed hour. We do have a lot to cover. We're going to spend a couple of minutes just doing some introductions. We want to set a little bit of context, and then we want to get right into the meat of the session. And we're going to cover a couple of important areas. One is a continuum that we talk about frequently at the Patterson Foundation that looks at how you go through times of challenge and crisis, especially when it comes to decision making. And we call that COPE-ADAPT-INNOVATE. And from there, we're going to talk a little bit about an approach to decision making, which goes through the lens of the mission of your organization, or as we call it, a mission-centric decision making lens. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's next. So we're delighted to have so many participants here today. I know we had 125 people registered for the session. So we certainly appreciate the widespread interest by folks who have joined us today. We had strongly encouraged executive directors, CEOs, board members, and staff members to participate. And you are here in terms of those teams. So the reason for that is we find that when it comes to advancing mission thrivability and so many other important kinds of work that we do with nonprofit organizations, that when you assemble a team with members from these three areas of your organization, it leads to richer conversations, action, and outcomes. So again, we appreciate you bringing those folks. If you have some folks who weren't able to join us today, you're certainly welcome to invite them to our upcoming sessions, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. The folks who are here today hail from almost 75 organizations with varying mission, size, and different types of makeups. And you come from all 4 counties in our region. So you represent a broad and diverse group. Well, we would like to start today with a poll question, and we're going to start with a fun and an easy one. So I would like to just turn it over to my colleague, Josephine Eisenberg, to introduce the first poll question. Josephine?
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Real quick, just to make sure that everyone can see the poll, if a few of you will put in chat box, if you're actually able to see it, and I'll start reading the question. All of these are actual national days, but which one is observed today? So go ahead and click the one that you think is the actual day today. We have National Give Someone a Cupcake Day. That's my favorite. National Crepe Suzette Day. National French Dip Day. National Sugar Cookie Day, and National Talk Like a Pirate Day. So we'll give you a couple more seconds to fill them in. Looks like people are liking that it might be Sugar Cookie Day. I'm assuming that means everyone can see this, which is great. Okay, I'm going to give you one more second. And here we go. The winner is, you guys think 40% of you guys say National Sugar Cookie Day, but Mike, what is it really?
Well, the answer is
dun, 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 dun.
National Crepe Suzette Day. So I think we stumped most of you.
Yes.
If you don't know what a crepe Suzette is, it's delicious. And we would urge everybody after today's session to go find one. So Josephine, thank you for introducing the first poll question, and let's continue. By way of some very brief introductions, yes, we do have a mascot for Advancing Mission Thrivability. You've likely seen him in a variety of places. He is an emoji, but that does not take away from his smarts, his good thinking, and his ability to be our Chief Thrivability Officer. So Alexander Miles Thrivemore, initials AMT, you will see in lots of different places. I'm Michael Oxman. I'm one of the managing partners and principals in a consulting practice called No Margin, No Mission. We know many of you who are on today's session, but there are also a number of you who we have not met. If you don't know us, I'll tell you in a moment a little bit more about what we do, but if I could just also introduce my partner in crime, Larry Clark, and have him say hello.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Labinar number 1. We're looking forward to it.
You'll be hearing more from Larry in just a few minutes. No Margin, No Mission is a national consulting practice, and we've been around for 10 years, and we do one thing, and that is to work exclusively with nonprofits to help them become stronger and more thrivable. And the focus of our work is on helping nonprofits look at ways to boost revenue so that they in turn can increase their mission impact. So as we dive into advancing mission thrivability today, you'll hear us talking a lot about ways to think about and to do both. We also have with us today our colleagues from the Patterson Foundation, and I would like to just briefly introduce them. With us is Michael Corley, who's the Senior Consultant for Administration at the Patterson Foundation. Michael, can you wave and say hello? Okay. Abby Rowland, who you heard from just a few minutes ago, she is one of the fellows at the Patterson Foundation and hails from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And Abby's been with us on, I think, going for almost a year. And you'll be hearing more from Abby in just a moment. And also with us is Josephine Eisenberg. She just shared the first poll question with everyone. And without Josephine, we probably wouldn't have all of you here today. So thank you to Josephine for all of her support on this initiative. And thank you to the Patterson Foundation for their generous support of this initiative. Most of you know the Patterson Foundation and have had experience and interactions with them over the course of the past several years. They're a wonderful philanthropic resource in our community, and they work to strengthen the efforts of people and organizations and communities. A number of initiatives in our region, of course, the Giving Challenge being the one that probably all of you have participated in and benefited from. You may have heard of the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Hopefully you've been to Patriot Plaza. Digital Access for All is a new initiative. And then of course, Margin and Mission Ignition, which is our earned income initiative that No Margin, No Mission has partnered with TPF on for years. When the pandemic hit a year ago, the Patterson Foundation immediately focused on what they call their 5 C's: caring, connecting, collaborating, contributing, and creating. And it was in that spirit that this initiative was born. So that's a little bit about the Patterson Foundation. So let's set a little context for today for advancing mission thrivability. And I'd like to turn it over to Abby to share.
Happy to, Mike. Thank you. So we want, by setting the context, we want to help ground everyone in some very recent history that we have all experienced. So next slide, please. So once upon a time, there was a pre-COVID world, and life was pretty good. You know, you had your budget was planned for the year. The season was in high gear. You had, you know, galas and fundraisers that you were planning or that had just passed. And, you know, operations were humming. So, you know, there's those day-to-day challenges, but overall, everything was working really well. Next slide. Thank you. And then COVID-19 hit all of a sudden, very quickly, and like a ton of bricks. So, you know, the season itself came to a screeching halt. Those fundraisers and galas were canceled, operations were paused, and you know those programs and services were disrupted as work patterns quickly shifted. So a number of us, many of us, went to working from home immediately, and I would bet that a number of us are still continuing to work from home as it has become the new norm, which definitely changes a nonprofit's operations. And so, it seemed like the world changed overnight. This was not a slow, steady crawl. It all happened at one time. So there's lots of fear and panic. There were a lot of decisions that nonprofits had to make. They faced a potential decrease in funding. Potential staff positions were in jeopardy as a result. There was a lot of concern about paying rent, mortgage, and other obligations. And, like I said, there was a need to make decisions extremely quickly. So thankfully, though, there was some relief via some funding. So there were 2 rounds of the Paycheck Protection Program funds, or PPP funds, which many of you may have applied to and received. There's CARES Act funding. There's local foundation grants focused on COVID relief, and some of those continue to provide ongoing relief. Related to that, there was, as Mike mentioned earlier, the 2020 Giving Challenge, which raised almost $20 million, which was a record high, thanks to the community support and the Patterson Foundation match. And so all of this led to kind of a lifeline for continued operations, even if those operations were altered or different from what they were before. So really, there's kind of a new hope emerging. You have an opportunity for reinvigoration and for rethinking, to kind of create new ways of thinking. Nonprofits are also very resilient as well. So, combining those two with an infusion of resources, which we kind of already discussed, creates new ways of thinking and new ways of doing. So, what are some of the new ways that you delivered services and events? You could have used virtual platforms and then reach new people who don't live in the Suncoast region. So there's kind of a new hope and a new way of thinking emerging, in combination with kind of a calculated risk-taking trying new things to see what works. But with continued cautious optimism, because we're not really sure what will happen next. So a question I'm sure we're all continuing to ask is, how long will this last? So you've had to make tough decisions, some probably within the previous year, and there might be more upcoming as well. So you're thinking about new realities, what the market will do. You're anticipating what if. Some of you might be scenario planning or might have done so before. You're making decisions about how to revise your annual plans and budgets, and trying to decide how to deploy those really precious financial resources that you've received or that you fundraised for. So you're thinking about all of these things and continuing to set your course and forge ahead. So that provides just a little bit of context into kind of where we're coming from for this Labinar today.
Thanks, Abby. So let's introduce our next poll question, and this plays directly from the context that Abby just shared, and we want to ask about your own reality. So Josephine, would you like to share this one?
Sure. Over the past year, how has your organization's reality changed? Not much, business as usual. Programs and services have shifted to virtual, but no other major changes. Continuously adapting to new challenges, but pushing through. Our world has been turned upside down. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to finish answering this. I certainly hope for all of us it's a different space than early last year. Like, I know it's been a difficult year, but I think these answers would be different than now. All right, a couple more seconds and we will see our results. So it looks like 77% of you say continuously adapting to new challenges, but pushing through, which is awesome. Mike, what do you think?
Wonderful. Yes, we have seen this before. Adapting is I think it gets a lot of play, particularly as we talk about, where have you been and where are you today? So it's actually a good segue into kind of the guts of the session today. And we're going to start by talking about this sort of idea of nonprofit reality. And as we all know, this idea of the roller coaster, this visual that you see here, is just part and parcel of living in uncertain times. We all know that over the course of the past year, we've seen our situation change. It's changed daily, it's changed weekly, it's changed monthly. And by virtue of that, we like to just sort of introduce the idea of how can we think about and make decisions perhaps better, more effectively, more strategically as we continue to ride this roller coaster. So a way to think about that, and maybe you have within your own organizations thought about it in terms of this continuum, but perhaps you haven't. And we talk about cope, adapt, and innovate as a continuum that we all go through, particularly during challenging times and times of crisis. And as I said, this idea of cope, adapt, and innovate may change at any given moment. But that's okay, and that's a natural thing to have happen. And what you should really try to think about, if you haven't in the past, is that your movement through these various phases of this continuum are fluid, and they will likely be different for each of you, for each of your organizations, and for your individual team members at any given point in time. So if we start with this area called COPE, clearly when the pandemic hit, we were thrust into a position of having to deal with some significant challenges. And at the same time, being forced to make some decisions that would be needed to regain or maintain stability. Now, when you think about cope, adapt, and innovate, what we encourage you to do is, if you haven't had the opportunity, think back to a year ago, talk with your teams, and start to discuss what you did when you were forced into that cope mode in terms of decision making within your own organization. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Same thing with the adapt phase of the continuum. When you move into the adapt phase, you start to make some adjustments. An adjustment so that your productivity returns or continues within your own organization. So you try to get yourself back into that mode where you're able to keep things moving with some momentum. And then what we typically would hope is that sooner rather than later, you move into innovate. And that's when you're actually finding new ways to operate and to deliver programs and services and products. And I think one thing just to keep in mind here is that this idea of cope, adapt, and innovate is it's okay wherever you are within that continuum. There's no right or wrong place to be. And this sort of idea of fluidity is just a part of it. But again, having the recognition that cope, adapt, and innovate is something that you all go through, have gone through, and will continue to go through, and being able to think about it and use it to your advantage when it comes to decision making. Okay, it's time for another poll question. So Josephine, I'm going to let you introduce this one.
Thanks, Mike. So you can see the question, but where are you now on the continuum that Mike just spoke about? Cope, adapt, innovate, somewhere in between cope and adapt, or somewhere between adapt and innovate? I always love to do a check-in like this. And interesting if you're here with your colleagues, to, ask them after the webinar, ask them what they put on here. That would be interesting to see. Give you a couple more seconds to fill in. And it looks like everyone might be done. So 59% of you say somewhere between adapt and innovate. What do you think, Mike?
Well, we'd love to see this. Most of you have, if not all of you, are out of the COPE phase. Most of you are out of adapt and well into innovate. And it's not unusual to see folks, sort of moving between those adapt and innovate phases of this continuum. So we're very happy to see that this is where you're sitting. And now what we'd like to do is encourage you to think with your teams, reflect a bit, and even use COPE, ADAPT, and Innovate as an opportunity for discussion. So when we talk about reflection, we always ask that question. So again, we're well into the pandemic, and hopefully we're going to be emerging from it soon. But the question is, has your organization taken time to reflect and think about and discuss this whole idea of COPE, ADAPT, and Innovate? If you have, that's good. If you haven't, it's an opportunity. And again, while this might seem obvious or intuitive, we've just found that in most cases, leaders, board members, and staff members within nonprofits haven't necessarily taken the time to be able to sit down, reflect, and discuss. So what phases have you been in? What decisions have you made in each of those phases? And it might just be that as you went through these various phases, you were making decisions that were suited to that particular phase at the time. Sometimes we go into autopilot mode, especially in COPE. And we're thinking about things that might be through more of a survival lens than they are through a thrivability lens. So how have you made those decisions? What were the outcomes of them? And also, and importantly, if and how you would do them differently next time. So these are really good questions to think about as it relates to these various phases of the continuum. So in COPE, and you can see here our definition to deal effectively with something difficult. Many of you, if not all of you, had operations come to a halt or other aspects of your organizations come to a halt at the start of the pandemic. So, questions to consider. How did your organization cope? What decisions did you make quickly? Who is involved in those decisions? And were the decisions mission aligned? And I know that within our own organization at No Margin, No Mission, these were very much front and center for both Larry Clark and myself as we were working through this idea of coping. And we're going to ask you to make this one of your team assignments after today's Labinar. We're going to have a handout that we're going to give you after today's session. You're not going to turn it in, but we do want you to think through each of these questions as it relates to what happened while you were in that COPE phase. Similarly, in the area of adapting, as you started to move out of coping, what kind of changes did you begin to make to adjust to these challenges that were being thrown at you? Again, as you were starting to figure out how to move from cope to adapt. What changes did you make to continue providing services? Were there services that just stopped and went away, either permanently or temporarily? And also, what has the response been? So again, anytime that you're making changes, there's going to be folks who perhaps will be able to adapt to them and others who may not. So again, we want you to think about this, reflect on it, and discuss it with your team. And then thirdly, in the area of innovate, which again, many of you said you moved into fairly quickly, and this is where you're sitting today. So when you innovate, new models emerge, and you look for ways to operate and deliver services to your stakeholders, perhaps differently than you did in the past. How has your organization innovated during the pandemic? What have you done? Are you reaching new people? And importantly, is the innovation mission aligned? And you'll hear that frequently as we talk about advancing mission thrivability, is this idea that is it both mission aligned or as strongly aligned to mission as it can be? And oftentimes when we are moving through COPE, ADAPT, and INNOVATE, we may be thinking about it, but it may not be front and center. So that idea of mission at the forefront or at the center of all your decision making is absolutely critical to what we'll be talking about next, and offering up some tools, some framework, and perhaps a slightly different way of thinking than you're used to or have thought about in the past. So let us serve up, I guess, what we would call 3 decisions that are, we just know through experience, are fairly universal in the nonprofit sector. So we're guessing that these will resonate, if not all of them, 1 or 2 of them will resonate with you and your organizations. So decision number 1, the pandemic forced a tsunami of decisions. Well, when it hit, and it hit hard, we had to make many of them quickly without the luxury of time. And you can certainly feel free to raise your hand or note in the chat box if this is sort of a decision that you were faced with when the pandemic hit. And then more importantly, this idea of how can we ensure that our decisions that we're making moving forward will help the organization to become stronger and more thrivable? Absolutely an important consideration. So that's decision number 1. Here's another decision that we believe many of you, are faced with or have been faced with. We're hopeful that our annual fundraising efforts will be fruitful. So again, this idea that we've been living in a in a crazy time, and certainly nobody knew what that was going to do in terms of fundraising, and we're still not 100% sure what it will do moving forward. The good news is we have seen a lot of generosity in the community and in our region as a result of the pandemic. But the question is, how can we allocate and spend these funds in the most effective and efficient way? That's a decision. That's a question. So again, if this is a question that you've considered within your own organizations, feel free to raise your hand or just acknowledge in the chat box as well. And then a third decision that may resonate with you is, well, we agreed how to spend our annual funds, but given the roller coaster that we've been on, we're reconsidering the best way to utilize those funds. We really may need to reassess and reallocate those dollars. So that's a decision perhaps that your organization is faced with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry to introduce the next part of this framework.
Good morning again, everyone. As you can see, the header is decisions, and you have made a lot of decisions over the past year, and you're still making some decisions as you're thinking about moving forward for the organization. We make decisions every day in our organizations, but we're talking about the bigger decisions here that really help, set the course and direction for the organization. So think about a big one that you've made recently and just write it down. Write it down on a piece of paper if you have something in front of you, and just keep it there and think about that decision, how you made it or how you're making it. We'll walk through some process now. So the first method is economic-centric decision-making. So some of you had to make decisions really quickly. You needed to, let's just use $100,000 as an example. You needed to cut that from your budget. It was very much a dollar decision, an economic-centric decision. You cut the dollars and you looked at your programs and your services, and maybe you had to cut your marketing or your communications. You eliminated those costly programs or services very, very quickly, probably. Hopefully you've ramped them up again, but you had to reduce them quickly. Maybe some of your staff you had to let go, some of the consultants, maybe you had to put a hold on some salaries or even reduce salaries. But when it first happened last March, April, May, some of the decisions you made were probably economic-centric. The second method is mission-centric decision-making. So you still need to cut your budget by $100,000, but your mission was driving it. So we're thinking about clients being served by our programs. And if we cut that program, how many clients won't we be able to serve? So it was more about your mission was driving the decision as opposed to the dollars or the programs. So some of you kept your really high delivery mission programs in place and got rid of or put on hold some of those other programs that maybe weren't reaching the numbers that some others were. So, your cuts were based on a mission contribution as opposed to the economic decision. And the third method is really kind of bringing them both together and thinking about economic forum lens and a mission-centric forum lens. And, hopefully you did both of those through the process, but there was probably times over the past year where you leaned towards one or leaned towards the other. So let's dive in and pay close attention. What we're going to focus on today is mission-centric decision-making, or the second one that I just outlined. And this will be a part of your homework, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the other two types of decisions or methods we'll focus on in our second webinar in a couple of weeks. So mission-centric. What is your clearly articulated mission statement? And you should know that. You should know that clearly. There's many organizations that we have them stated and they have to look it up or they have to go to their website. Well, what's yours? It should be in front of you all the time. So let me just use an example before we move on. And I know that Northport Meals on Wheels, Scott, you're probably here today. I'm not talking about your organization, but I want to use Meals on Wheels as an example. So Meals on Wheels, their mission is to assist individuals to live independently by providing nutrition and caring supportive services. So that's a mission statement for an organization. Mike? So if you think about that mission and you think about all the programs that they have to deliver, what goals do we set for ourselves for the year? So there's a lot of goals. And hopefully when you do budgeting, and maybe you're in the process of doing budgeting now, if your budget starts in July, or you're halfway through your budget if you started in January, but you're looking at the goals that you set. So Meals on Wheels, for example, might have said, how many home service delivery meals do they want to deliver? How many people are accessing their food bank Maybe there's a number there. Or how many people are attending their nutrition education programs. So they set some goals that they wanted to reach those types of numbers when they put their mission-centric thought into creating that budget around their mission. So what did you specifically achieve against your mission impact goals? So are you measuring them? You know, you don't know how many times we talk to organizations to say, did you set goals? And now give me the analytics around that mission-centric goal that you set. How many people have you reached this month or this year? And what are those outcomes? It's really important to keep track of all of those. So that's step one, is clearly articulated mission, what's your impact goals, and are you measuring them? So what we would like you to do is to create a complete list of programs, products, and services and other offerings. So think about yours, think about your organization, and sit down and really kind of list them all out. And think about, did you set those goals up last year when you created these programs, and are you measuring them? But just create that list and put them down. The second piece of this is really order them based on your gut feeling related to each of your mission impact for the year. Could be the calendar year, or it could be the fiscal year. So just your gut feeling, did the mission delivery take place with the numbers that you helped set up? So you can see on the side, we have program 1, program 2, program 3, maybe product and service 1 is kind of fell down, and program 3 maybe is at the bottom. So list yours out. How do you prioritize them? So gather that available information, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, for all of those, and put them all together. Gather that information and create that list. So once you've done that, so do it independently, then meet as a group. Have your team get together and talk about, what did we actually deliver on Mission-Centric last year? How many programs, products, and services did we deliver? How many people did we reach? And did we impact? What did that look like for us? So we want you to do that. We want you to meet as a group and think through it. So, and step 3 is analyze and reprioritize. Think about your gut versus fact. And maybe once you take a look at it as a group, all of those programs and services, some of them kind of move around in the continuum. Using Meals on Wheels as an example, they might reprioritize. Once they look at the numbers of people and the numbers of programs that they delivered on, maybe what they're doing is they realize that they didn't reach a lot of people in their nutrition programs, and they would reprioritize that maybe closer to the bottom as they're thinking about mission-centric decision-making. And maybe, just maybe, they're going to actually deliver more programs to homes because that's where they need to be putting their dollars right now. So let's move on to a poll question, and I will turn it back over to Josephine.
Hi there. So the next poll question is, I love this one. So let's think of your organizational decision-making as a road trip. Since the pandemic hit, where in the car does your mission sit? Driver's seat, comfortably driving the entire trip. Passenger seat, navigating intermittently, but never getting to actually drive. Back seat, taking frequent naps, but in the car available if needed. In the trunk, out of sight, out of mind. The roof rails, hanging on for dear life as you speed down the highway. So where in the car does your mission sit? Nobody's on the roof rails, which is very good news for a Thursday morning. Maybe it changes frequently, week to week. Give you a couple more seconds. And thank you. Great. Looks like 72% of you say driver's seat, comfortably driving the entire trip. What do you think, Larry?
It's great. You know, when we did this about 9 months ago, the numbers were a bit differently. There was a lot of folks had Mission in the passenger seat because they were going through a lot of challenges. We're so happy that 72% of you are in the driver's seat, and a little concerned about that roof rails one, or an organization who's still not quite there, but these are really great numbers.
One thing that's interesting to note here, and we do like to at least point this out, is while we do love to see that so many of you clearly have mission, you know, right squarely focused in the driver's seat, remember that this approach, this framework for mission-centric decision-making that Larry just walked through is a way for you to prove that. So in other words, we may intuitively think or believe that mission is in the driver's seat, you know, comfortably, but if you actually take your programs, your products and services and go through the rigor and that discipline of proving how each one of them delivered on mission, it may cause you to think a little bit differently, or at the very least, give you an opportunity for some strategic refinement in that program, product, and service delivery, and where it should fit in sort of the overall scheme of priorities. So again, we just encourage you to now go back after today's Labinar and start to test, you know, your hypothesis or your belief. It'll be of benefit. We firmly believe that.
Mike, can I say one thing also?
Yes.
Also think about who made the decisions. Was it the executive director making most of the decisions? Was the executive director or the leader meeting with board members and making the decisions? Was the board making the decisions, or staff members independently, or volunteers making decisions? So think about who made them and how they made them. The who is almost just as important as the how.
Right. So we've given you a few things to think about during today's first Labinar, both in terms of this continuum of what we call COPE, ADAPT, and Innovate, and starting to reflect on it in terms of your own organizations and your team, where you've been, where you are currently, and the decisions that have been made as part of or within each of those phases of that continuum. We then talked about this sort of first approach to decision-making, which Larry walked you through that process about how to look at your own organization's programs, products, and services through that mission-centric lens, and really to assess them, to prioritize them, and to look for opportunities to strengthen. So what's next? This series, Advancing Mission Thrivability, has a combination of virtual sessions, 2 Labinars and 2 webversations. So after today's Labinar, a week from today, we will host our first webversation. So next Thursday, the 13th of May, same time, 10 to 11. And during that webversation, you'll have the opportunity to come with questions and thoughts, anything of interest that perhaps you took away from today as you were starting to think about it through the lens of your own organization, and share it with us and others who are a part of that session. So unlike this session, which today is much more of a webinar, Next week's webversation will open up and you'll be able to talk freely. We'll be able to see your faces and to have some nice exchange and collaboration. And then the series will continue for 2 weeks after next week. Our second Labinar will be on Thursday the 20th from 10 to 11. And that one we're calling Building a Mission-Centric, Economically Informed Framework for Thrivability. So again, today we introduced the mission-centric lens, and during the second Labinar, we'll talk about kind of this economically informed lens for decision-making. And then we'll bring the two together to say, here's the ideal way to make decisions through both a mission-centric and economically informed lens. And then we'll finish up our virtual series of sessions with a second webversation, and that'll be on the 27th of May, same time. And during that session, we'll also give you an opportunity to come with questions and share some thoughts and ideas. But equally important, we're going to share with you how you can be considered for another component of this initiative, which we call our consulting sprint. And let me just tell you a little bit about that. So as many of you know who have worked with the Patterson Foundation, we do oftentimes engage with nonprofits and give them something more, or give them an opportunity for something more. So the gift for everyone who's here with us today is the virtual Labinars and webversations. That is the gift from the Patterson Foundation. But if you do have interest and need and preparedness to delve deeper into this topic, we will give you an opportunity to be considered for a deeper level of involvement. Again, we call it our consulting sprint. And we will talk more about that, but we want you to at least start thinking about whether you would like more. The good news is we have had 2 groups now go through Advancing Mission Thrivability, or I should say through the consulting sprint phase of this initiative. And our first set of graduates you can see listed here hail from various parts of our region. Some of you may have already spoken with some of these organizations or leaders from them. And if you haven't, you can certainly feel free to. Our second group of AMT'ers, as we refer to them, you can see here. Again, a diverse group and different types of mission, different sizes, and really different focus areas. So what's your assignment? Well, as we often do with our learning labs, or in this case, our Labinars, we encourage you to go back to meet with, whether it's virtually or on site with your team, and to work on these 2 exercises with your team. So the first being those discussion questions that we shared with you about this COPE, ADAPT, and Innovate continuum. And then secondly, this 3-step process that Larry walked you through in terms of your own organization's mission-centric decision-making. So using your mission, your goals, your results, going through and doing an inventory and ranking of your programs and products and services based on how they delivered, and then applying some real data or information or some analysis to prove that. We do have a handout that will be provided, and that will be forthcoming shortly. What we would like you to do is work on those 2 exercises before Labinar number 2. Again, that's on the 20th of May. And ideally, work on it between now and next week. and come with any questions or comments or insights or thoughts to the Webversation next Thursday. And even in advance of that, you're going to get a participant survey after today. So if you do have burning questions or thoughts that you would like to ask, you can also note those in the survey, and we will talk about those and address them during our Webversation next week. I should say that as you work through these assignments and the worksheets, capture your thinking, make notes on them, because if you decide to apply for the consulting sprint that I just referenced a few minutes ago, we are going to ask you to submit these worksheets and share your thinking and share the process that you went through in each of them. So again, if you are thinking about going on and delving deeper, we will ask you to submit those as part of what we call the advancement packet or application. Two more things. You're going to get a feedback survey. So we would appreciate it if you would submit that to us by next Tuesday, the 11th of May. We value your feedback. We always like to hear from you in terms of any thoughts that you have related to today's session. And it'll be a very simple survey. There's only a few questions on it, so it won't have to take a very long time for you to complete. And then also important, we are going to require that you register your team for Webversation #1 next week. So you are only signed up for today. That is it. You need to make sure that you sign up for next week's Webversation. So you're going to get an e-invitation tomorrow to join us. And then once you do register yourself and your team, you will get another Zoom link that'll be emailed to you after you've registered. So again, you're going to get a separate e-invitation for the next session, and you must register for it for your individual team members. Okay? So we have used up our time for today. We are right at 11 o'clock, and I guess in the interest of time and to make sure that each of you can continue on your way with all that you've got going on today, we're going to wrap. We're going to say thank you, and we're going to say see you soon, hopefully next week. So again, we encourage you to bring your team of 3, executive director, CEO, board member, and staff next week. If you have questions, please email us, lclark@nomarginnomission.org and moxman@nomarginnomission.org. And of course, you can also feel free to send any questions you've got to Josephine at the Patterson Foundation. So with that, we will wrap, and we will say thank you to everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.